Firstly, oil. Oil and energy, cheap, non-renewable resources of energy, have underpinned everything. The agrochemicals, the fertilizers, the tractors replacing land used to grow oats to feed the horses that drove the ploughs. You name it, you think it, down to the oil that drives the Volvo that takes you 6 miles on average now to a hypermarket to get the cheaper food. It is an entirely oil-based food economy, and yet oil is running out. The impact of that on agriculture is one of the drivers of the volatility in world food commodity markets. Everyone knows that. Most of my colleagues in food policy around the world, we think actually, important though oil is, the thing that is going to bring the 20th century approach to food to its knees is actually not oil but water. I say as we are in God's blood. I speak as someone who is a farmer in the forest of Boland, which is the centre of God's blood. I have a friend whose farm has 120 inches of rain a year. It seems inconceivable that anyone speaking in the English language, let alone with a British passport, could say that water is a problem. It is. 50% of all vegetables coming into this country come from foreign countries, obviously. Think of the growth, explosion of growth, just of Kenyan green beans. Every stem, like my finger, of a green bean from Kenya has used 4 litres of potable water from a water-stressed country. We have a very complicated situation emerging around water. Embedded water, I'm a commissioner on the Government Sustainable Development Commission, and I led a review of how government deals and doesn't deal with supermarkets as the gatekeepers of the modern food economy. And one of the key things that we try to push, and I certainly push very hard and been pushing behind the scenes, is to get DEFRA to start auditing, begin to develop the methodology for auditing food by water. It is going to be the decider in the next 30 years. Water economy, water exchange, virtual water is going to be a critical factor. Climate change is altering everything, where food can grow, how it can grow, etc. You know it. It's going to alter what we can do. Fourthly, biodiversity. The collapse of biodiversity is something that even worries the agrochemical companies whose market is about selling. Some very strange things are happening now. The old black, white, them, us divisions that the organic movement in the gardening world has developed on is beginning to break down. You will get very radical thoughts coming out of the long-term thinkers and planners in companies that we've spent a lot of our time arguing against and with. Biodiversity is one of the key ones. Demographics. Well, you don't have to be a eugenicist to say that going from 6.7 billion people on the planet to 9 billion on the planet by 2050 doesn't mean a lot more food has got to be produced. It has. A factor is what diet people eat. So if you eat like the average American, well, we're dead. The planet can't do it. If you eat like us, the planet can't do it. If you eat like a Chinese of 100 years ago, you can feed 12 billion. It depends what you eat is a critical factor. But nonetheless, the demographics is an important feature now. Urbanization is probably the most important thing within the social sphere. The shift we have now, the demographers are arguing about it, but let's not argue about it among ourselves in a tent in Ryton Gardens. But we're probably just past the point at which, for the first time in human history, more people live in the towns than in the country. In which case, where do they get their food? That's why I told you about my failures with my own garden. I can't grow my own food. my wife and I try to have something from our garden, even if it's just a herb, each meal. But we eat out a huge amount. We're away, I'm away, I've had lunch here. Any pretense of feeding myself is a nonsense. Now write that over 5 billion people. Who's going to grow food? Point number 7. Who's going to be the labour force? There is a collapse of the labour force. Here in Britain, look at the racism over migrant labour. Look at it. I was born in Lincoln. My home county has been a disgrace. The Fens are a major producer of vegetables. It has brought in migrant labour at very low exploited rates and then treated them disgustingly. Now, this is delicate stuff, I know, but if British people aren't prepared to go and work in the fields, how are we going to be growing vegetables? Remember, that's why I declared my interest. I'm a public health man. We need to consume less meat, less dairy. We need to consume more fruit, more vegetables. From where? The nutrition transition is a phrase that in my world is critical. This transformation that happens. There seems to be something. My friend Barry Popkin, the professor of population health at the University of North Carolina, who invented this phrase, the nutrition transition, he's very sober about it. He thinks it's unstoppable. He's not a neo-Darwinian in the sense that he doesn't think it's hardwired. But when people get richer, they alter their diet. They eat more fat. They eat more meat if they eat meat, unless they're from a vegetarian culture, where culture overrules other things. But in that process of the nutrition transition, very important things happen. People shift from drinking water or tea, i.e. leaves with hot water, to soft drinks, sugar. They're getting increased calories in, makes them fatter, leads to the heart diseases and the degenerative diseases, the non-communicable diseases. The nutrition transition isn't just an issue of nutrition, although it is, with direct impact on public health. It is also a major cultural phenomenon. I've left probably the thing that gets me out of bed every day last, which is the healthcare costs. The reason the food system cannot go on as it's going on, I'm still talking about the new fundamentals, by the way, is because of the cost of healthcare. The cost of diet-related diseases to the NHS in this 5th richest country civilization, if that's what we call it, has ever produced, is unsustainable. Think what it does to India. The town I was brought up in, now one of the biggest cities in the world, Bombay, Mumbai, has the highest rates of diabetes type 2 in the world, and it has no NHS. It cannot afford. There it is a disease of the rich. Here it's a disease of the poor. Poor people are fat. Here, in India, rich people are fat. It's a return, in a sense, for us, to the 18th century. You see those big portraits in the National Portrait Gallery of the Henrys. Grotesque. They are making a social statement. Much as those of you who know Minoan culture celebrated with the big goddesses, hugely fat people who undoubtedly died prematurely of cardiovascular infarctions, but they didn't have an NHS to bear the costs, to do the stints and stents. The healthcare costs are bringing the food system to its knees. That is what got the Chancellor, the Treasury, to start thinking about prevention. And that applies here in Britain. Think how much it applies in the United States, where 40 million people don't even have health care insurance. And then think your Cargill, or Monsanto, or Unilever, or Nestle, one of the big companies. Nestle sells 1% of all the food consumed on the planet and intends to make it 2% by 2020. That may sound very small, but it is awesome power. And that's my final point. Volatility of price is coinciding with battles of power and concentration, power and control.